As much as anyone else, I would love to find my rock, the person who will complete me, my other half. But sadly, don't shoot the messenger. I don't think this person can really exist, or rather, they can exist, but not for very long.
Plato suggests that love is not something that's fleeting. If you really want love to be eternal, you need its objects to be eternal. Therefore, he thought that philosophy was the proper act of love. It's an inquiry into the nature of beauty and goodness themselves.
It's worth recognizing why evolution produced something like love. So those parts of the brain that light up when we see our loved ones overlap quite a lot of what happens in mothers when they see their children. Those dopamine parts are kind of a glue that glues us together and that helps us learn.
Now, I think in our society and in many other cultures around the world, we're governed by something which I call, in my book, the fairy tale narrative. This belief that if you meet your partner, all your problems will be solved. It's the ultimatum of life. It's the only route to happiness. You can see it in the language that we use. You know, people say things like, oh, he or she, they've had such a bad time of late, I do hope they meet someone. You know, as if that's going to solve all their problems. Or they say, you know, the fact that we use the term settle down. Oh, she's settled down now, she's happy. It's almost like, that's it, you know, life's over. I have an issue with this for two reasons. One, it implies that our life before we settle down was somehow unsettled, you know, was it insignificant? And also, does it mean that once we meet someone, the credits roll and that's it, and life's over? You know, you see in all the Hollywood movies, it's all about how the boy meets the girl, and then once they meet, the credits roll and it's game over, like they live happily ever after. But what we know is that isn't always the case. Many people can be unhappy in a marriage or in a long-term relationship. Now, love is inherently human. I love falling in love. Who doesn't? It's arguably one of the biggest human highs of all. Who doesn't like that feeling when you meet someone and you really like them and they are the center of your universe? But sadly, this isn't really compatible with either our human nature and our society. And I'll tell you why. Firstly, let's look at anthropology. Some anthropologists have looked at the human mind when it's in love. Now, a leading researcher in this field is called Dr. Helen Fisher. Some of you may have heard of her. She's based in the States. She's dedicated her whole life to studying couples in love in brain scanners. It's absolutely fascinating. When she looks at couples that are in that honeymoon phase of romance, the bit of their brain that's lit up is the part of the brain which is the same area that's responsible for addiction. So essentially, a crack addict has a similar brain pattern to someone who's falling in love. And this explains why we become quite fervent. This explains why people can kill for romantic love. It actually makes us slightly crazy. But, you know, but we like it, and our brains are full of dopamine when we're in this stage. But what they also know is this doesn't last for very long. And there are evolutionary reasons why we develop this capacity as humans.
Coming back to you, Helen, right at the very heart of it, you said something very profound. You know, we need to maybe let go of a lot of our preconceptions and traditions, some of our romantic stories of love perhaps, but your research has taken you to some very interesting places. Can I ask you first of all how your experience has actually brought you to that conclusion?
Well, it's a case of chicken or the egg, isn't it? Did my research bring me to my conclusion, or did I already have an issue with how we view love as a society, and that's why I did the research. What I think, and what the main reason why I went off and explored all these modern models of relationships, my book, was because I had a real issue with this belief that once you find love, it encroaches on your individualism, and there is this expectation that you give everything for love. Now, I'm not being anti-love here. I think love is a brilliant thing. and I want to find it, and it is one of my life goals. But this idea that, you know, there's this expectation that you have to live together, that it will be lifelong if it's real. You know, people talk about a failed marriage or failed relationship if it ends. So it's this idea I think we have in society that a successful relationship or a real relationship has to be cohabiting, it has to be monogamous, it has to last forever. And maybe we should rethink that now in the modern world, because we live such independent lives. I mean, for me, it was just that the very thought of giving up my independence and my choice was what made me shy away from that conventional model of a relationship.
But can I ask, are there things that say happened in your research or in your life that like sort of pivotal moments in that discovery?
Were there pivotal moments?
In your field work, perhaps, for your book?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few things which people said struck out to me. So, for example, I interviewed lots of lifelong bachelors, and one guy said to me that he almost got married, and he was engaged, and then he said, one day his parents said to him, you know, it's okay, you don't have to have children for us, you know. And he said as soon as he heard that, he felt this burden being released from him, and he realised that actually he used the phrase sleepwalking into marriage, and he realised that actually that wasn't what he wanted, but he thought that there was this pressure both to please his parents and everything to do that. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't want to meet someone he falls in love with, but I do think that with our society now, we live much more independently. People now in their 20s and 30s are used to having so much freedom and independence that we need to adapt our relationship models to reflect that. And I just had one very quick point. There was a sociologist called Michael Rosenberg who in the 60s was talking about this, and he said, he called something the age of independence. He said we're approaching an age of independence, which he basically defined as people in their 20s and 30s were starting to go off to college, go traveling, starting to have independent lives. And he says this is going to cause a real change in relationships. People are going to start having shorter term relationships because they're becoming more independent. And he was right, and that was in the 60s.
Shorter term relationships, because the hormones are wearing off, Anders?
That might be part of it, but we should remember that even